consumers actually think that mortgage rates are going to go up over the next few years, as high as 10% in 3 years, which is very, I would say, unlikely because the Fed is planning to bring interest rates down instead of up. But it just shows that kind of perceptions of the economy and perceptions of the housing market are even worse than the actual reality on the ground.
Right, like polling that shows that people think we're in a recession.
Exactly,
Right.
Yeah, there was a recent survey this week that 56% of people believe that the U.S. is currently in a recession. And a big part of that is because maybe they don't understand exactly what the word recession means.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by economics reporter Zach Halaschak. Zach, we've gotten some recent home sales numbers. What have they told us?
Yeah, home sales are actually going down for both new and existing homes, according to last month. So this was the metric for April. And that's showing that demand is falling for housing. And a big part of that is because mortgage rates have ticked back up from sort of the lows that they got in December when people thought the Fed was going to start cutting interest rates. So now they're up to above 7% again, which anytime mortgage rates go up, home buying and demand typically cools off. So we're starting to see that happen again this year as the Fed looks more and more likely to hold off on cutting interest rates till later this year.
Is there concern that that's going to be a longer-term trend given the Fed's unlikelihood of cutting rates soon?
Yeah, I mean, sure, that's always a concern. It just really is going to depend when the Fed and how aggressively the Fed decides to start bringing down that interest rate level. I will say there was a recent survey by the New York Fed that came out, and consumers actually think that mortgage rates are going to go up over the next few years, as high as 10% in 3 years, which is very, I would say, unlikely because the Fed is planning to bring interest rates down instead of up. But it just shows that kind of perceptions of the economy and perceptions of the housing market are even worse than the actual reality on the ground.
Right, like polling that shows that people think we're in a recession.
Exactly, yeah. There was a recent survey this week that 56% of people believe that the U.S. is currently in a recession. And a big part of that is because maybe they don't understand exactly what the word recession means. It's basically 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, high unemployment. They're kind of taking it to mean overall economic malaise, and that's kind of what they're feeling.
The economy just seems bad to them.
Yeah, and that's because of inflation. Obviously, people 3 years ago, everything was much cheaper, and so when people go to the grocery store, when they buy a car, they feel the pain and they think, yes, this is a recession, even though technically it's not correct.
So central bank digital currency has been a hot topic on Capitol Hill. Walk us through what exactly the debate is.
Yeah, so Whip Emmer, Tom Emmer from Minnesota, he actually just introduced a bill that passed the House that effectively bans the Federal Reserve from issuing a central bank digital currency known as a CBDC, if you hear that phrase thrown around. But basically the reason why is he's worried that the government will create this like digital dollar and then have the ability to abuse that power. So if everyone goes through the Fed has access to all their transactions, all their data, in theory, obviously there would be guardrails in place for a CBDC. But his argument when I spoke to him the other day was that, look at all these other things that started with guardrails and that kind of had been shifted over time. So like the Bank Secrecy Act was meant to only look at foreign bank accounts, and that's shifted. And he had a few other examples. But his point was that when you give the government that much power and that much access, eventually he's worried that the government will abuse that down the road. So Republicans and a few Democrats, I think it was 3 Democrats, joined in voting for this bill.
So what are the prospects as it heads to the Senate?
I would say probably not very likely. The Senate is a lot more slow to move on things. I mean, this year we had a very bipartisan tax package that several Democrats joined with Republicans in backing, and that still hasn't even got a vote in the Senate and doesn't look likely that it will. So I think this has very long odds in the Senate during an election year. And I think that even if the Senate were to pass it and they were to get the bipartisan support, that 1 or 2 votes enough they needed to get it over the finish line, I'm not sure that Biden would sign that into law.
CBDC heebie-jeebies.
Yes.
Thank you, Zach.
No problem.
You can read Zach and the rest of our policy team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.